in our company, we're a family and we treat everyone with respect. And if you can't treat our care team worker and our welcome desk person the same way you would treat the interview people, we don't want you there.
You're listening to episode 132 of the Fitness Business Podcast. We'd like to thank this month's premier podcast partner, Precor, delivering industry-leading cardio, strength, functional training products and service to over 90 countries across the world. Hi everyone and welcome along to the show. Our special guest this week is Mark Miller. Mark is the Chief Operating Officer of Merit Clubs and has over 25 years experience at senior management level. He's responsible for the day-to-day management and operations of all 9 clubs, the Merit Consulting arm, MCN, in addition to its new wellness division. He has a broad range of experience, including club management, sales, revenue generation, personal training, programming, budgeting, and cultural and service design in multi-company environments. Mark was a guest with us back on show 15 when we spoke about proven strategies for developing yourself and your team through in-house training, leadership techniques, and ongoing education. This week, we're chatting about what we can learn from outside the fitness industry to improve and enhance our business. We're about to transition to this week's main interview with Mark Miller, but first, here's a message from one of our podcast partners. If you haven't explored a functional training space for your gym, now is the time. With Queenax Functional Training by Precor, there's a unit to fit every space, plus industry-leading education to ensure that training is delivered with confidence. To learn more, just head to precor.com/fitness business podcast. Hey, Mark, welcome along to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Now, we want to talk today about, I guess, what it is that we can learn from outside the industry, because quite often we come to conferences or we are in roundtable groups with people that are in similar businesses to us. So we learn a lot from people in similar situations. But what would you say is the danger of doing that, of only learning from people within our industry?
Well, I think the danger becomes when you start to either learn from people within the industry or you even try to copy people, I call it sameness. And it's almost like you go into buildings and what ends up happening is, they're all painted the same color. Or you go into neighborhoods and you can tell that the builder only built 2 styles of homes and every house looks exactly the same. And what ends up happening is it's cheap, it's easy, it's effective to do that, but it doesn't have any uniqueness to it. And I think the same thing happens in our business is that we only learn from people within. The challenge that I've always had for myself and the challenge I give to all of my managers and my leaders is that they're not always going to go to the same conferences. Like, I don't want them attending. Unfortunately, I'll attend them, but, I like to shake it up so that people go to different ones because I want them to learn from outside. Like, what can we learn from outside the industry? Mm-hmm. And so that we're not being the same as everyone else.
Okay, so from your experience, what are some important innovations from outside the industry that we should actually know about?
Well, those are, great questions. I think there's several different ones in my opinion. So the first one is obviously technology. You can go into several other stores, and for years, the way health clubs operated, let's talk about sales for a second, is that you came into the desk and they called it the front desk. And you signed a guest register, manually. And then the salesperson came out and greeted you and they had a paper needs analysis. And, that whole thing is almost like going to a doctor's office. No one wants to feel that stuff. So now you start to go to other businesses and what you find out is that they're using iPads, and the iPads unplug and they walk around with you and they show you different things. Like if you went to an Apple store, they're not called salespeople, they're called geniuses. And, you want to learn about laptops. They go, great, let's go learn about laptops. And would you like to learn about this as a complement to that? How about this aspect of it? Do you need any of these things? And the whole time they're with you on the journey and they're not, they're interacting with you, not making you feel like you're getting quizzed or dug into and like you're going to the back office like they used to do in the old days with sales. So I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is hospitality. I think, the world's evolving as we're getting more technological. We're also starting to lose service. But there's still some companies that seem to get the service. And I think if you go there and you observe what they do, like by our clubs, we've actually started to study a couple of the restaurants that are in the area and really dial in how they train their staff, how they teach their staff. What do they call their things? And we've actually changed. We don't no longer call it the front desk. We now call it the welcome desk. Yeah. And their aspect is to really welcome people. And so in our new clubs, as we're designing them, we're eliminating every aspect of smoothies, towels, and everything so that the only thing that person does at the welcome desk is greet people, make a connection, and do things different. It's almost like what happens at a hotel. You walk up and you're a guest. They register you and all that. So I think there's different things like that. And then the last aspect is when you start to look at sports, everything is about an experience. You're going there and they're creating an experience and so that you have a good time. And what ends up happening is you spend a ton of money going to sporting events, especially if you have a family of 4 or 5. But the experience that they create is different and they're engaging the senses. And I think that's an aspect that we need to learn how to do better.
I totally agree. And it's interesting when the first of those 3 elements you mentioned was technology. And being here in the States, one of the experiences that I had, which I think would work really well in a fitness facility, was I went into a Nike store. And similar to the Apple experience, I had a couple of items in my hand, looked forward, and I looked at the queue. And there was this huge, big queue down the front of the store. And I was up the back of the store at this stage. One of the sales people grabbed me and she had a mobile device and she went, "Oh no, I can process that for you right here." So I was standing at the back of the store. And they took care of it. And they took care of it right then and there, so I didn't have,
and think about how that saved you time, energy, and,
and stress of not having to line up.
And you might have chose not to get those because of that
Correct.
line. You might have just said, you know what, it's not worth it to do that.
Yeah. So for me, that ticks the box of technology and experience.
Yes.
In both of those. So, Mark, in what you've given us a couple of examples, but are there any other sort of practical ways that you would take those lessons and implement them into a club?
Well, we've done a lot of the different ways. So some of our processes and our systems and organizations, we've actually taken from businesses outside. Mm-hmm. Give you an example. We actually, our hiring process, our whole, from the beginning to when you get hired to when you get onboarded, we actually took from a pizzeria. And so we didn't obviously take all of them, but we took the concepts and the ideas and, we utilized some different things that obviously fit the fitness business. And then we came back and we implemented them. And we had to do a couple rifle shots to get things going initially to make sure that we could get it to work. Mm-hmm. But over the years, we've now got a process. And, we still, to this day, we look at how Starbucks, how Chick-fil-A, how Nick's Pizza, how the Ritz-Carlton, how Four Seasons, how all those different organizations, how Google, mm-hmm. how they hire people and how they onboard people. And then we bring back ideas and we figure out how to enhance ours. Mm-hmm. We're not looking for how other operators are doing it. So I think practically you have to go learn something and then you have to come back and implement it.
Yep.
And you have to try it.
Give us a specific detail on that. So what did you used to do? Maybe give us 1 or 2 examples versus what you've now implemented with what you learned from Nick.
So what I used to do, or what we used to do was, we'd have people fill out an application and they give us their resume. And we'd obviously look through their resume and then, they have a certification. Oh, that's good. Oh, they have a degree. That's fantastic. And then we would bring them in for a one-on-one interview. And we start off with a one-on-one interview. And we would ask the traditional questions, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? All the things that they teach you. And what we would find is that we weren't really truly getting an authentic person. And so we scratched all that, and now we do a group interview first. So you have to come in, and you are with 10 other people, and they're from every department. You could be a general manager, you could be the chief operating officer, you could be whoever it is, and you could be sitting right next to a care team worker, which is our housekeeping staff. Mm-hmm. And they're all in this thing together, and we are doing nothing more. We're not even asking the traditional questions. We're coming into a room that has no chair set up, and we're watching how they behave. And so then when there's two people interviewing. One is always watching, one is asking questions. And we watch how they do it. We make them put a puzzle together, and we see how they do with the puzzle. And what we're learning is what their character traits are. But more importantly, there was 2 steps that happened before that, because our welcome desk is where they sign up, and we watch how they get greeted. And we see, are they friendly to that person? Do they take care of that person? Do they, engage that person? Is that person really important? And then we actually have one of our care team workers clean up around them. And we have someone sitting in there watching how they behave around that person. Like, do they help the person, or do they make the person, it's like, oh, well, they're just a cleaning person? Because in our company, we're a family and we treat everyone with respect. And if you can't treat our care team worker and our welcome desk person the same way you would treat the interview people, we don't want you there.
I'm so glad you went into that detail, Mark. First of all, I love the fact that you have renamed your housekeeping your care team. That in itself is fantastic. And then thank you for explaining.
Yeah, that's my regional housekeeping director came up with that. She's very hospitality oriented.
Yeah, it's great. And I could imagine that the people within that team, that must give them a great sense of, feeling part of that family that you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And what we do is we operate on purpose, not policy in our company. That's what we say. Mm-hmm. We don't really want policies. You have to be able to operate in the gray. It's about doing the right thing and taking care of people. And one of the things we learned was when the housekeeping staff used to see themselves as housekeeping, they thought their job was just to clean up. Mm-hmm. But now that they see themselves as care team, they understand that they're taking care of people. They're making a difference in people's lives. And what we found was that they are probably even the most impactful individuals in our clubs, more so than I could ever be. And we learned that when an unfortunate accident happened where one of our care team workers, she died in a car accident. And at her funeral, there had to be over 250 people. And 100 of them were members of the club. And then obviously all of our employees were there too. We were probably another 75 of them. God. And the stories that the members got up and said how she cooked them dinner when they were going through a divorce, or she, watched their dogs for them when they were going out of town, or one of the ladies was going through a divorce and she had that lady stay at her house for 2 weeks. And you didn't realize that this was an individual who made an impact on these people's lives. And so they truly do take care of people. It's
a tragic story, but a beautiful reminder of the impact that, so many people have with your members. So thank you for sharing that. Mark, can we finish off today? Perhaps you can share with us a couple of tips for ensuring that we are always keeping up to date with new developments and new innovations from outside the industry. Before we hear those last tips from Mark, here's a message from one of our podcast partners. MyZone is a wearable technology platform that leverages personal goal setting, gamification, and social platforms to motivate your members. To find out more, go to myzone.org.
So I'll probably give 2 or 3 that I can think of off the top of my head. So the first one would be stop reading everything from inside the industry. Read everything you can from outside the industry. Study what people are doing outside. And more importantly, maybe not even read it, go experience it. Go and sit at restaurants and watch what they're doing. Talk to people, talk to the staff. Go sit at hotels and watch what they do and become very curious, ask questions. I think we have to unlearn more than we learn sometimes. We have to get out of our own ways. That might be number 2, which is don't think you already know it all. Just because you've been doing this, like for me, for 25 years, I realize every day how, I hate to say it this way, how stupid I am, because there's so much to learn and so much to grow. So you have to be willing and humble enough to know that you have to learn. And then the other thing is build a really solid team around you, because they're going to motivate you to get better. And when you get better, you're going to help make them better. And you can learn from all of them. And that's the exciting part, is when I can learn from my staff, then I know I'm doing something right.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fascinating, and I loved hearing the insights into your business and the ways that you have renamed different parts of the business, the fact that you've learnt from outside the industry, and I think there's a lot of things that we can take away from that for our own fitness business. So thank you so much for joining us
today. Thanks for
today.
having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you to Mark for those great tips today about learning from outside the industry. Now is a really great time to think about what conferences and events that you have planned to attend in the next 12 months, and maybe consider adding something different to what you might normally do. As Mark suggested, perhaps it's learning from someone in hospitality. It might be rethinking about what you call your departments or the job titles that you give your team. If you've had any influences from outside the industry that have improved your business, then I would love to hear about them. Please email me at chantal@fitnessbusinesspodcast.com and let me know what has worked for you. Now, one of the advantages of working with amazing podcast partners is that we have industry experts at our fingertips. And I know that when you're opening a new facility or you're updating an existing one, it isn't always easy to know where to start. So I spoke to Steve Menzel from Precor to talk about the things that we should consider when fitting out a facility. I'm here today with Steve Menzel, the National Account Manager for Precor. Steve, thanks for chatting to me today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Now, let's pretend that I'm the owner of a 3,000 square foot facility that needs fitting out with new equipment. What would you suggest?
Well, our representatives are trained when they meet with an operator to really understand how they're going to be different and better in the marketplace. Typically, if we have an operator that's working with only 3,000 square feet, we know that there's space constrained. So we need to understand, is there some specialization that they're going to be offering in the marketplace in a small space like that? Oftentimes that might be a studio. So we want to understand their mission, their values, their business model very clearly, and then how our solutions might apply to that. So we would begin the discovery process by experience mapping what a typical member, what they would be delivering to them in terms of their experience, programming, and support. And we have a lot of tools to support them. The industry typically for these type or size of facilities is leaning oftentimes towards functional type training in the space where they might have a unique owner-operated scenario where they're offering real high-touch, hands-on type programming. So we've invested heavily as a company in the last few years in things like rigging and racking and CrossFit type apparatus that would support operators like that. But to really help the operator best, we would typically ask them many, many questions around who's their demographic, how do they want to attract them, what are their ideas for keeping them there, retaining them, how might we help them gain operational efficiencies. In a facility that small, throughput is an issue, so how can we help them get benefit for their clients in a shorter amount of time so they can have that throughput. And lastly, are there unique opportunities for them to generate secondary spend in their facility, other things that they might offer, whether it's group training, personal training, supplements, nutrition guidance, coaching, etc.
Excellent. Well, Steve, thank you very much for that very comprehensive answer. And thanks for joining us today on the Fitness Business Podcast.
Thank you.
Precor Quickfire 5.
Next week, I'm thrilled to bring you part 2 of my interview with Rick Caro. We aired part 1, which was about selling a club, back on show 129 a few weeks ago. And in next week's show, I'm going to be continuing my chat with Rick, and we discuss using a third party in the sales process, what some of the challenges are when selling a club. We talk about the valuation process. Rick helps us understand due diligence, and we discuss challenges around selling a studio. For now, here is Rick's Precor Quickfire 5. Today, we are joined by the President of Management Vision Incorporated, Rick Caro. Let me start by saying what an absolute honor and privilege it is to have you join us on the show, Rick.
Well, thank you.
Now, before we even start today, I have 2 people to thank for making this interview happen. The first person is Emmett Williams, the president of MyZone, who sent me a little message a couple of months ago and said, you have got to get Rick on the show. So I want to say thank you, Emmett, first of all, for suggesting getting Rick on. And second of all, of course, JT from Active Management, who introduced us, as you mentioned earlier, at Ursa and then over email to make this interview happen. So shout out to both of those people for making this happen. Now, Rick, we start each of our shows with the Precor Quickfire 5 questions. And the first question is, why do you do what you do?
It's a great question, especially when someone's been kind of doing some of the same things over and over. to go back and ask the why question is kind of stimulating. But I think the answer is, and I've said this many times to people because I've been in the industry a long time, I love this industry and I've kind of grown up with it and in it. And I love what I do in it because I get a chance to help others. And that's a major motivator. So I feel very lucky to have found something where it's something I love, something I get reinforced in, and something where people still feel that I can be helpful. So it's a win-win for everyone.
And Rick, tell us, what's the best piece of advice that you have ever received?
I'm thinking of that now. And I guess the first thing I'd say is find passion in life. Make a choice, follow the dream, and then really pursue it fully. And I think I've had a chance to find something that I'm totally passionate about and feel very lucky.
That's incredible advice. And what's a personal habit that helps you become better at what you do?
Well, I'm considered to be a very organized person, so I like to organize my day and week in advance as best I can. And everyone has different techniques for doing that. I make lists and frame out every day. And because I do a lot of consulting, I may work on 7 or 8 different kind of projects each day. So in order to do that, I need to kind of have an idea of what I'm going to try to do that day, even if it doesn't work out that way. So I'm one of those who tries to really spend time organizing before my day starts and sometimes before my week starts in order to be able to be effective.
And tell us, what's one book that you would recommend and why?
Well, there are a lot of books that I think can be helpful to people in this industry. But one that I always refer back to is the one called Differentiate or Die by a guy named Jack Trout, who was a speaker at IHRSA years ago. But he really focuses on the fact that many of us are Me Too companies, that there isn't very much positioning and differentiation amongst what we do versus what others do in the industry. And we need to be much more dedicated in our focusing. So his favorite line is, you need to be one of one in a category. And if you can't do that, then you need to reflect about how to go about that and then commit yourself to really being truly differentiated.
Well, thank you for that book recommendation, Rick. And tell us, why should our listeners come back and listen to the amazing show that we're going to hear from you next week?
Well, I think part of what I think you and I will talk about today is really the whole process and what it takes to sell a club, what is involved in that process, and what are some of the key insights into succeeding in going that direction. And so those who have any interest, not just today, but in the future, and want to have an idea of how they might exit or how they might want to buy a club, because many of the processes are the same for whether you're buying or selling, or buy out a partner to get more control of a club. All of those things, I think, will be addressed one way or another during our discussion today.
Well, Rick, I feel so privileged to have you on the show, and I know that our listeners are going to get so much out of our interview together next week. So thank you very much for joining us today for the Precor Quickfire 5.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for another week of the Fitness Business Podcast. Before we finish off today, a quick reminder that all of the resources, links, and transcripts for today's show can be found at fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. Thank you so much to all of our partners for their support and to our foundation partner, Active Management. Just go to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com/active for a free business development ebook. That is all for this week's show. I will see you next week. And remember, what you leave behind is not what's engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others.